Hey everyone, we're back. Welcome to the Games Tavern Happy Hour. Jeff and I are here with Craig Campbell from Nerdburger Games, and we're excited to have him join us today in the interview room, I guess we'll call it, virtually. Craig, I see you're looking pretty sharp today. I don't know what makes me say that, but there's definitely something very sharp going on over there. Um, Well, Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you've taken time out of your busy schedule over at Nerdburger Games to talk to us a bit, and I know you do a whole lot of cool stuff yourself. And hopefully, we're going to find out a lot more cool things about you tonight, and then also talk about what your current projects are a little bit. So, first, where in the world are you?
I'm in Atlanta in the United States. So down in the South, although it's plenty chilly at this point. It's not getting hit the way some other parts of the country are.
Yeah, early February in Atlanta. Yeah,
it's chilly, occasionally just barely cold. But I grew up in Wisconsin, in northern Wisconsin, so I am
like Eau Claire, Green Bay,
north of Green Bay.
North of Green Bay, like the Piney Woods.
Just about, almost in the Upper Peninsula.
Oh my goodness, I do know that area.
Almost in Yooper, almost in the Yooper area there.
Yeah, so you are probably half Remoraz, a frozen creature that lives in the Arctic. Wow, man, that's impressive to say the least.
It's also a big change going from up north to the deep south.
Absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about you now. You're from Atlanta, Georgia now. You're behind Nerdburger Games, but where you grew up in Wisconsin, a birthplace of many a great RPG.
Yeah.
Because I think that the reason those kinds of games did so well up there, and they continue to be a place where they're invented, is because when it's really this bitter cold out, a lot of people get together inside and they spend a lot of time indoors together.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things that D&D got its start in southeastern Wisconsin, in Lake Geneva with Arneson and Gygax. And so when something's there from like the earliest inception, and it spreads and spreads and spreads, and it just kind of takes hold. I went to college in Milwaukee and worked there after college for several years, and you couldn't swing a dead cat without finding a game group. I mean, if you wanted to play an RPG, and it didn't matter what RPG, you could find a group without too much difficulty. And this was in, I can only assume it's even better now. This was in the era of like pre-internet, where like it was, meeting people on college campus, or at, if you're going to high school or whatever, or going to the local game store and looking for the flyers and the little,
tearaway,
the little phone number tearaway,
and
finding a game group and just putting up, like, you could put up a tearaway with the phone numbers for a game that wasn't like a big name game, and you'd get people. You wouldn't necessarily be, beating back 20 people who wanted to play in the game, but you could probably find 3 or 4 players.
Absolutely. I grew up in Chicago for a good chunk of my life, and I spent a lot of time in Wisconsin. I actually served in the Army Reserves in Wisconsin for quite some time as well. And all my friends were nerdy gamer types for the most part. Did you start playing RPGs in college, or was it in high school or middle school, or when was it for you?
Well, what happened was I was in high school in northeastern Wisconsin, and I had a friend who, like, what I wasn't really close friends with. We just kind of hung out here and there. And one day he showed me, I don't even remember for sure what it was. So this is in the 80s, but it was like, one of it might've been first edition D&D. And the dice, and said, like, we should play this sometime. I think you'd really like this game. And then he never mentioned it again.
What a great friend.
Yeah. And so then it was a few years later when I was in college, my freshman year of college, just before spring semester ended. A friend of mine, Brian, said, hey, you should play D&D. I think you'd enjoy this game. And so he ran a game of AD&D second edition Ravenloft.
Oh,
for me and his like two suite mates in the dorms there.
I had that original set. Yeah. That's a great set. Yeah.
And I don't remember a great deal about the session itself. I remember I played a half elf bard, and the character almost got swallowed whole, eaten by a giant frog in a swamp. Like on the way to where the adventure was going to begin. Like this was like where we were traveling to the place.
Setting the pace early. Good. Good.
And then so I dug that. I enjoyed it, and I think Brian played to the strength of that. I'm a huge horror fan, horror movies and TV shows, and I was reading a lot of Stephen King at the time, and so definitely that helped. That certainly didn't hurt to play Ravenloft. And then that summer I was back up in the hometown, and like when you're in the small little hometown in northern Wisconsin, not quite so easy to get a game group together. But I bought the 3 books and for D&D and just devoured them over the summer. I mean, I just read them constantly. And then when we got back down to school in that sophomore year, Brian and I and some other people, it kind of kicked off playing D&D, and we played D&D pretty consistently through the next few years. We were all kind of roommates and suite mates with each other. At one point, that like the following year, junior year, we all moved in to the suite together. So we were like literally like if there was a spare moment, we would be playing, we'd be gaming. And it was often D&D, but we also dove into Shadowrun and the old West End Star Wars, the D6 system, and a few other things.
Okay.
And so yeah, I just kind of grew over the course of college, where I was kind of surrounded by other gamers and was like living with them in the dorms.
Oh yeah, that's a great way to blow off steam and not work on your term papers too. Were you always a gamer growing up, or were you a board gamer kind of person before college, or did games really just click for you in college?
Not really so much. Like growing up, we had board games, but they weren't, they were just all your standard kind of Milton Bradley style board games. And I got irritated with them more often than anything. I hated Payday because there were like a few bad cards that you could draw in there, and I was getting them all the time. And I was just like rage flipping the board. But
wow.
like, well, maybe not really, but yeah, I just like there were certain games I just stopped playing entirely. I was just like, okay, this game just hates me. But then it was, getting into college, the RPG thing kind of, I think what attracted me more about that was the role-playing aspect of it and kind of getting into a character rather than being distanced from the narrative of the game and being more of like, for me, board gaming and card gaming is more like I'm playing a game. And RPGs are more like I'm telling a story and acting and so forth, and that extended into other things that have interested me over the time, over time as well. Where I even to this day I don't play a lot of board games, just kind of here and there.
Was that a huge part of for you the ability to improv, be creative, perform? The art side of that was the real draw over, say, the mechanics, like what's in a board game or an American board game, for example, because American board games have a little more mechanic heavy. The Euro board games can have a little bit more story driven parts with mechanics layered in. I think right. If you're looking at the difference, I think a lot of American board games have now, brought that Euro style into the fore, but with an RPG, there's so much more to it in terms of the performance art, the creativity, the improvisation of the story. Is that really the draw for you, or?
I think that's where it started. Sure. And I think it's reflected in some other things that came about. In like there came a point where some of those same people that I was gaming with got me into performing at like the Bristol Renaissance Fair in Southeast Wisconsin.
That was my first Ren Fair.
So doing summer. Oh, nice.
Yes.
Doing summers, 6 summers in a row of, doing 10-hour days where you just get into character and you stay in character, except when you're backstage. and portraying, and it was all very, a lot of street theater kind of stuff, and very improv heavy, where you had a character, you kind of knew what the deal was and how you should react to things. You had a baseline to work from, but then you
knew where you sat on the hierarchy,
right.
all that stuff. Yeah, they do a really good job at Bristol too. So I'm intrigued, because I knew, so I was in there in the 90s, the early 90s is when I was out there. So 92, 93, 94 is when I headed out there the most. I had a ball there. What years were you out there?
It was the late 90s into the early 2000s.
Okay.
When I was.
What a great time to be there too.
Yeah, it was pretty slick. The fair has taken a decidedly they've embraced the fantasy stuff.
Oh, really?
What with Game of Thrones and there's like there was, at least, I'm not sure if it still exists, but they've gone through different things, and there were like fairy troops and everything for the kids, with character actors that are done up in fairy garb and what's that I'm looking for, the airbrushed makeup and
really, they went that far. Wow, that's a lot more than they're doing here in Maryland. So
when I was there, it was still pretty straight historical, and so it was the court of Queen Elizabeth II, Elizabeth I, sorry, Elizabeth Tudor, and you had a military guild, and then the court guild, and there was a guild that portrayed the townsfolk, and then there were other stuff and all the stage groups and stuff. And I was in the Guild of St. George, which portrayed the court for 4 years. I played a few different characters, and then my last 2 years I was in the Guild of St. Ives, which was the townsfolk. And I invented, I basically talked to the guildmaster and said, I want to make a Renaissance era country bumpkin family. I want to, can I recruit a few other performers, and we're all going to be the Friddle family, and we're going to be like the Renaissance England version of the country rubes, who are just there. We come from Ipswich to see the Queen. We're all just pig farmers, but we're here on a. Oh,
look at that! Oh, that's so big. It's a hog, and all sorts of the state fair kind of thing. Okay.
And it became a little bit of an institution for a few years. We had people that would come in and guest spot as another Friddle cousin or uncle or whoever. We had a lot of fun with it.
Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive. Jeff, have you ever done any of the Renaissance Fair stuff?
It's something that I've been meaning to get more of. I've been twice here to the one in Maryland.
I don't think it's comparable to Bristol, but it's good. The Maryland one is really good.
And it's probably the closest I've ever actually lived to one. Like, I've never really been near one growing up. Grew up now you're saying Bristol is in Bristol, Tennessee, right?
No, it's Bristol.
It's just called Bristol. It's in southeast Wisconsin. It's right near Kenosha, Racine.
So yeah, I grew up
south of Milwaukee.
I grew up in southern Indiana. Ren festivals are not a thing in that area anywhere around us.
A lot of corn.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
But my first year, once I moved into up here, I went to the one in Maryland because I'd heard and went with friends. And yeah, it's pretty cool. I definitely need to go back more.
How did the country bumpkin family get taken? Like what happened with that? How did that work out?
Well, I was like the de facto leader, just because I organized and kind of brought a few people in to do it. And it basically became, mostly it was just the shtick of like, okay, well, we're all family. So we all, we have an automatic in for interaction, right? So we have like something that we can build off of, like, our characters all know each other very, very well. I think the most entertaining time that I had with the Friddle clan was at an event that would happen once a day, just a couple hours into the fair. I don't know if you ever went to see it. I'm not sure how prevalent it was in the early 90s, but it was called Court of Common Pleas. It was a scheduled event. It took place, you know, at a particular time and place. But it was the shtick was that the Attorney General to Her Majesty the Queen, Sir Edward Cook, would come in, and this is kind of based on history, where he would an attorney would hear cases of the common folk. They would bring suit against one another, and it was very comedic. But it was very improv heavy. So it was always, they would, like, we would discuss with the people that were kind of running it and say, okay, this is going to be what the suit's about. These are the people that are involved. And that's it. That was all the planning that took place. And then you completely just improvise your way through it. And there'd be 2, 3, maybe 4 cases in a half an hour.
That fast. So you couldn't get into depth. Yeah. You could.
There was we were not joking around. You were moving through this because it was all, you know, beat to comedy. It was like, you know, get to the punchline, get to the joke, get to the funny way that this can end. And when you've got a lot of people who are participating, that, you know, you've got the Attorney General and like his guards and retinue, and then all of these other townsfolk people that are all skilled improv performers to one degree or another. Like, it's easy. It is surprisingly easy to find a great funny way to end something, because just one person has to come up with something. And the rules of improv is yes and, like, somebody comes up with something funny, a good way to wrap it, and everybody just goes along with it, and you can find your ending that way. And it was one of those really great things. Occasionally I would get into a discussion with patrons, with people who were just attending the fair, and they would be like, I can't believe you people come up with like a whole new script every day to do that. I said, no, sir, ma'am, there's no script. That is entirely improvisation. And this was kind of before things like Whose Line Is It Anyway had gotten into the
television
zeitgeist.
Exposure. Yeah.
So people didn't understand that, like, no, this is like, if you know the rules and you're quick and you kind of have a good sense of humor, you get a handful of people together like that, and you can punch that out. You can make the funny kind of off the cuff.
Yeah. Unless you had experience with Second City, because that was around back in those days, and some of the other improv groups out of like Chicago and Milwaukee actually had quite a few improv groups back in those days too.
And I took improv classes with some of those.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that when I was walking around there, some of the stuff I saw, I couldn't fathom the scale and scope of it back then, because I was in the early 90s. I was in high school and having a ball, and just I walked around and was just amazed at how everyone was dressed, and that was not long after I'd moved up there from Arkansas. So being a country boy, but I'd already been to Europe. I'd already been to England, as a matter of fact, as a 10-year-old. So I'd seen, you know, England, you know, Hadrian's Wall, you know, the Abbey and all the other cool stuff that they have there. But then to see it like done, period, in Bristol was just off the charts. So it's really cool you were a part of that, man.
It's a big production. It's like people don't realize that there's a lot of moving parts, and it takes everybody kind of pulling in the same direction.
And plus, you have to be at the right spot at the right time, because it's moving. It's a giant moving play. In a lot of
you got there are people that are in certain groups that are constantly moving from one area to another, because they're going to go do a thing over here on this stage, and then they're going to go do a thing down in the street over here. Then they're going to go, you know, and they have like a short break, and they're going to go do a song thing over here. And
Absolutely, yeah. We interviewed Bran from Spirit of the Wild Candles not that long ago, and he actually is a renter as well, and he has a lot of fun stories also. We'll have to talk offline and maybe get you two together sometime and just let you share stories. So the first RPG you played was Dungeons and Dragons, then, it sounds like. What was the first RPG you DM'd?
Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons. Okay. What's your favorite RPG to play in then?
Now?
Yeah.
Or just like where period. What's my favorite game to play in right now? I don't get to play a lot. That's the thing. I do tend to, when I do get a chance to play, it's usually like a one shot or a very short campaign here or there. I really did. I played a short, like a multi-session campaign, just like 4 sessions of Masks. By Magpie Games, that I really enjoyed. The Powered by the Apocalypse system is intriguing. Like I find it really interesting and fun to kind of see how that functions. Like it's the game designer in me that's looking at that going, boy, that's awfully different from the stuff I design. Let's see how it works, you know. And I have not yet taken on the challenge of trying to create a game using that type of a system, but that's like one of the things that I've enjoyed the most recently. But I do, like I said, I have a tendency to GM a lot more than I play nowadays, and most of the time it's playtesting.
Okay. Powered by the Apocalypse has actually gotten to be so popular we had to add a channel to it to our Discord recently.
Sure.
And so the conversations have started to pick up on that. So I'm intrigued enough that I have to start taking a look at that game system as well. And I love Magpie games in general because
Magpie's just filled with great people, and they make some great games.
Yeah. What is an RPG you haven't played in or run that you would if you had time? Is there one out there?
I want to play Aliens very, very badly.
Aliens.
The Alien game. Again, because I'm a horror fan, in part, I just want to see like how do they replicate the mood and tone. And I have the game book. I've read parts of it. I just haven't had a chance to play it. So like one of these days I'm going to get a chance to play Alien. And get horribly slaughtered by a xenomorph.
So,
but I mean, isn't that half the fun though?
Yeah, I mean that's a great. There's so many stories you could do with that RPG at some point too.
If your chest isn't bursting open, are you really playing Alien?
No, you're not. Well, somebody's. It's all fun and games until somebody's chest bursts open.
And then it's really Alien.
And then you learn why we have quarantine protocols and why you should follow them.
It's based on the Year Zero engine. I see. I see where they're going with this.
So, as you played all these games, when was it, transition wise for you that you decided? I mean, you were already a creative guy. You were already doing things like the improv and leading the charge on some ideas with the Renaissance Fair. So, for you, was it a major leap to start looking at designing games because you were probably already tweaking mechanics? I'll bet.
Sure.
Early on as a dungeon master or a game master in various games. But when do you think you made the full, I think I want to do game design? Because that's what you're kind of doing now.
Well, it's a side gig. I mean, I do have a day job, but it's a side gig that takes up a fair bit of time. I think I wrote my first paid working for a game company as opposed to just designing a whole bunch of stuff on your own. Because if you're GMing, you're probably designing. To some extent or another, even if it's just developing a little bit of a setting or coming up with an alternate rule or something like that. And so I was doing plenty of that, but my first actual gig was writing an adventure for the High Folk region for Living Greyhawk in its first year in 1999. Because I was friends with and gamed on the weekends with some of the people who were organizing the High Folk region for Living Greyhawk. And they said, hey, Craig, want to write something? Because we need writers. And so I did that. And then for years, I didn't really pursue anything else, but it was always kind of in the back of my head. And there came a point where, name drop to tell the story. I was gaming regularly on the weekends with Jason Bowman, who designed Pathfinder. We went to college together, and he moved out to Seattle and took the Paizo gig and became the editor for Dragon. For Dragon. And he invited me to write something, and I did. I wrote a thing for Dragon, co-wrote a dual article with another guy, and then I had a few other things in the pipe. And then Wizards of the Coast took the license back for the magazines as they transitioned into 4th edition. And eventually the magazine went digital, during 4th edition. So I kind of parlayed, and everything I had in the pipe died. So that all went kerplooey. And then I started picking up, just because now I kind of knew a few people, they passed my name around, and I started writing some stuff for the RPGA. For use at conventions. And so that was where it kind of started to actually pick up, the point where I actually had multiple writing gigs each year. where I was just, writing a short adventure or something that was going to get played at Gen Con or at some other convention. So I did a handful of those. And then when 4th edition really kind of got rolling, all of that ramped up, and I was suddenly writing a bunch of stuff for the free side of the website, for Wizards, and then eventually pitching and being invited to write certain things for Dungeon Online and Dragon Online. And so there were a few years before the Nerdburger Games thing happened where I would have 7, 8, 9 writing gigs over the course of a year, including some that were like 15 and 20,000 words.
Oh yeah.
All in my free time.
And that's after editing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was around, I don't know, where does that work out to? 2010-ish is probably about where it kind of really started to ramp up. And I had a few years where I did a lot of that. And then 4th edition started to peter out because it didn't last nearly as long as people were kind of expecting it to. And the transition toward 5th edition started. And if you recall, at the end of the 4th edition transition, they stopped making crunchy stuff. They mostly were putting out books that were kind of flavor and setting. And a lot of the magazine stuff kind of dried up too. So I thought, well, I can wait to see what happens with the next edition. I could go find other companies, or, and I had written a few things for a few other game companies, and do that, or I could try to design my own game.
Okay.
So yeah, it was around 2010, so I guess, geez, wow, that's 10 years ago, that it started to ramp up proper. And I had quite a lot going on.
Yeah, I can only imagine what it was like to have that much going on with 9 gigs in a 12-month period and cranking them out like that. That's a lot of dedication and holding down a day job, which have we? So what if we can ask, without too much detail, what's your day job?
I'm an architect.
You're an architect. Oh, so that actually is a good thing to parlay into. Let's kind of explore that a little bit. So as an architect, how much has that influenced your, let's say your game design? I mean, architects are very meticulous. They plan. They actually have usually some pretty good skill with art as well, or at least hand drawings.
Right.
Is any of that impacted, or do you say influenced maybe some of the ways you're doing your design?
I don't know that it influences specifically the design, but I think there are aspects to being an architect that translate nicely to being a game designer and also a publisher. Architecture is art and it is craft. It is, you want the building to be aesthetically pleasing, interesting, a nice space to inhabit. But then it also needs to get put together. There are rules for putting, for constructing a building that's going to keep the weather out and that's going to
keep it from falling down.
Keep it from falling down and make sure that it functions properly and that all the spaces are in the right places and everything's adjacent to what it needs to be adjacent to, and so that the building is functional. So there's a mindset of kind of melding those two things that I think works nicely. And comes out in game design, where you're creating a game where not only are you crunching the rules, figuring out mechanics, figuring out how the thing is going to work as a game, but then also, wrapping an interesting story about it and making it a comfortable and entertaining thing to take part in. You're wrapping yourself in this story the same way that you walk into a building and you want it to feel a certain way. You want that the story or the setting or the game to feel a certain way to the player. You want it to elicit an emotion or to provide a particular play experience. And so there's a lot of that. And then on top of it, architects also are very much project management types. There's a lot, they do a lot of different things. And I think that lends itself well, like learning to juggle a lot of stuff and a lot of disparate disciplines, knowing just enough about structural design to be dangerous, but not actually design something so that it doesn't fall down, knowing enough about plumbing, about mechanical, about, electrical systems, and then, as a publisher, you're bringing together all the pieces and parts of, not only are you designing, but you're also kind of self-editing and then editing the work of others, and you're doing art direction, and you're managing a website and managing, and coordinating freelancers. And there's a lot of juggling of different things that you're doing as a publisher as well.
Do you feel that when you build like your maps for your games, that you have to make sure that your castles have privies in a certain place so it's functional? Or
I have done that. There was an adventure for Dungeon that Dungeon Magazine online for 4th edition that took place in a ruined church, and it was 2 stories. It was a big building. This is effectively the dungeon.
Mhm.
It was a ruined church, and so there were it was, it had boy, this is gonna, okay, here we go. Architect nerd alert. It was like, a cruciform church, so it had wings, and with the narthex and colonnades and so forth.
Hit
and
us,
then,
hit us,
yes,
man. Hit us.
so there were wings that were intended to be, this is the quarters of the clergy who lived inside the church when it was functioning, and there were privies provided for in those quarters.
Near and dear to my heart, my friend. Near and dear to my heart. Okay. We often make jokes in our campaigns about like kobold plumbing. It's the best plumbing ever. Look at this. It flushes. It's amazing. And it's like, but I mean, did you have anything as part of your design that you brought in from architecture that was funny, or that you thought would be a great inside joke that if you're an architect, you get it? Or was
there's inside joke. There's nothing that I put specifically that I can think of into a game, but I've had jokes with, I gamed with some architects, other architecture students at one point too. And I've gamed with people who know I'm an architect. And so I'd like to make jokes about, terrible lighting in dungeons. Like, this would never pass code. Like, you can't do anything in here. You can't see anything. There's not nearly enough foot candles. This is not a proper handrail or guardrail. I mean, this this balcony is over 30 inches off the ground. There needs to be a 42-inch guardrail.
You mentioned that, it's something that we have in the United States. And then when I went to Iraq for the first time, and you look around, you're just like looking around and you're just like, this country has nothing about safety and
no building code.
No, the bridges have no rails. I mean, it was just, you're on your own. You better make sure that you're treating yourself safe. So yeah. So your dungeons actually had that stuff, and you described it as a huge impact when it didn't have that stuff. I think that's awesome.
Oh, I'd crack jokes about it when we're playing. Yeah. It's like, and people would ask me, it's like, I would, I draw a map, something out and everything, and say that there's a balcony here and there's a colonnade and blah blah blah, and this is up above this, and that people, my players would ask, well, are there handrails? Are there guardrails? Like, am I going to just fall over the edge? That looks dangerous. I shouldn't go up there.
No, there's no, adventure doesn't happen if you sit behind the safety rails. So,
yeah.
So as you made this transition, I mean, what inspired you to decide to do this?
I'm a sucker.
Sucker? Okay.
Yeah.
I get it. I get it.
I mean, I had quite a bunch of, I had upwards closing in on 30 probably freelancer gigs under my belt. And I had started to dip my toe into, there were times when I kind of developed not new rule sets, but just like, subsystems or little tack on things that you put in there. A few of the times toward the end, I was actually given the opportunity to write my own art orders for the adventure, because the writer envisions what this adventure is supposed to be like. And so at the time, it was Chris Perkins said, hey, why don't you write your art orders for these 4 illustrations? Just describe what you envision the artwork to look like. And that's what the artwork ended up looking like. They probably tweaked the art orders to be a little more understandable, but I can go back and look at the Baba Yaga's Dancing Hut adventure and be like, yeah, that's exactly what I described. For Ellen of the Fair, or for Natasha the Dark, because I wrote the art orders for those, and the artist interpreted and turned it into lovely artwork. So I had enough of all of that. Again, it's the architect mentality of things. I had enough of all of that under my belt to be dangerous. And I thought, I'll just try to make my own game. And, you know, if it doesn't go anywhere, if I don't finish it, if nothing else, maybe it becomes a thing that I can play with my friends. And so I started working on Murders and Acquisitions, which is the first game. I kickstarted it ultimately. I mean, I spent that game was like 3 years in development, and it's not a terribly robust game. So I took my time. I was like, this will be done when it's done.
That's a good way to do it. When you can do that,
especially early, when you've got the option. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, kickstarted it, and it kickstarted well enough to cover the expenses of, you know, producing getting freelancers for artwork and editing and layout and all that stuff. And then it just kind of started to roll from there.
When you started doing game design, was there, let me try to frame this a slightly different way. You've been doing game design for a little while now, and you've been writing and doing all sorts of other projects, you know, and you kind of understand now if anyone understands the process of putting something together, it would be you. Well, I mean, you've done it. I mean, it doesn't mean you've been amazing at it, but
yeah.
Obviously when we do things like that, we make mistakes sometimes. Are there any early mistakes that you feel like you definitely learned from part of that? Like, you know, as you know, you ever have that moment where you're like, it could either be like an aha, well, I messed that up. I at least we caught it. I can fix this. Or was it, oh, this really screwed up and I hope I never have to do this again, kind of thing? You know, anything like that?
No, I haven't. I did some of that like before I started, before the Kickstarter era, right? Like I designed games before Murders and Acquisitions, and you know, I wrote a whole big thing up and I gave them to friends and we all sat down and played them, and I was like, well, that was terrible. And you know, that was the end of that game. But there are certainly things where, you know, like I've pushed the boundary of things, or I've tried something that just fell flat, just fell absolutely flat. My favorite example of that, where the play testers had to tell me, no, this is not good.
Was we're like, you know, all of that, it's just not good. It's just,
yeah, just why'd you do that? That's no good. Was for Capers, the core game is built around using playing cards rather than dice, and you're flipping cards one at a time and trying to get a good pip value and also a good suit, and you get to flip multiple cards, and there's a whole mechanic to it. And then when I was writing some of the supplements, I got to Capers Covert, which is the second supplement, where I was going to include chase rules, like vehicle chase rules. And I started looking at other games and what other games have done with chase situations. And it's one of those dicey, I personally feel chase rules are one of those dicey things that ranks right up there with grappling in some systems. D&D 3rd edition, where like the chase rules are, well, there's a lot of different approaches, and I'm not sure how well any of them really work, or if they're you know, which ones are truly the good approach. But I came upon the rule system for the for the James Bond game from way back, TSR's James Bond game, which had a neat
SSI's
SSI, yeah.
Yeah, it was SSI, and it was called
like, James Bond 007. It was.
Oh, was that one? Okay.
I think so. Yeah, it's. I believe so. I think from the 80s. And it had chase rules in there that involved it used dice, but it had like a bidding system that was part of the chase rules. And I thought that was interesting because Capers has this sort of gambling aspect to it, because you're flipping cards and trying to get a better card, but you might get stuck with a bad card, etc. And so I thought, like, I'll do like a bid thing where you draw, like if you're driving the car, you draw a small hand, and you can bid a card for different reasons, without getting into the specifics, because the mechanics aren't in the game anymore. There, you know, I tried this very different thing, and it was different enough from the core system, and I gave it to the play testers, and like one of the playtest groups was kind of like, this is interesting.
Oh.
and all of the other playtest groups were like, yeah, this just doesn't work. Like, this is so, it's so different from the core system. It's going to require that we relearn the chase rules every time we run a chase, because everybody's going to forget them. Because it's different enough from the core system, and so the whole thing got scrapped. And I went and did something that's it has a couple of pieces in it that are kind of similar to what the like stunts, and like there's different how you can do cool stuff when you're driving in RPGs, not in real life, kids. And
good caveat.
Yeah. But otherwise it went back to more like the system from Capers, and I rolled that out to the playtesters, and they were all like, oh yeah, this is great, this works wonderfully. And there was a little tweaking to be done, but yeah, a whole subsystem of rules that was like the playtesters literally told me no.
How have you responded to that? I mean, like, because you have playtesters who kind of talk around because they don't want to hurt your feelings, and then you have playtesters that want to tell you exactly what they really think. And which do you respond to better, you personally?
Well, I've in the time that I've been designing and having people tell me what they think of my designs, I've grown a very thick skin, and I've come to realize that there's very little that I'm going to ever work on that will be that precious, that I must keep, that I must have, that must be the thing that is part of this game. That, like, so they, if when they told me this didn't work, I was like, okay, you know what? Like, I was in love with the idea of this like neat little deviation from the norm and this bidding thing. And the players said, maybe it's a neat idea if the whole game was built around this, but like it just doesn't mesh well with the core system that you've developed. And we've gotten used to that core system with a core book and also one supplement, and then everything else in this supplement does that. And you've got this one thing that does things differently. So that went, it was a little tough. I felt like, I'm gonna have to kill it.
Yeah,
it hurt a little.
Did you build another game around it later?
No, but I've got a copy of it saved. I mean,
maybe you should look into a chase game. I think
a game where there's like a bid system. Yeah,
Spy Hunter, the board game.
And I mean, it doesn't even have to be in a role-playing game. You could build like a light card game that's just built around it.
That actually sounds like a pretty cool idea. You heard it here, folks. What would you say is your most successful project or your most popular project that you've worked on so far?
Capers is the flagship.
Capers is the flagship. Okay.
It's got the most backers I've had on a Kickstarter, over 500. It continues. It's been out for a couple of years now. It continues to sell as well as it did when it first came out. It was popular enough that I did 3 supplements and a bunch of accessories to go with it, and all the supplements were fundable on Kickstarter. It actually became a real thing. It's a proper game line,
including a hardback last year, right?
Right. And last year I did right before COVID hit. I ran a Kickstarter to do a print run for like a fancy, nice hardcover with printed end pages and bookmark ribbons and all that fun stuff. And then that funded. And I ran, did a print run of several hundred copies, and I fulfilled the Kickstarter. And then I sent all those books to the IGDN stock and to IPR and, some of your Studio 2 and whatnot. And I put some in a warehouse, and there they have sat for the most part.
Well, we'll have to take a look at Capers.
Yeah, I mean, and it still gets bought occasionally at Drive-Thru RPG. As a hardcover or a soft cover, and I try to remind people, like, hey, the fancy hardcover, the fancy one, is exactly the same amount of money, costs the same as the print on demand one. Which the fancy hardcover has a sewn binding and is going to hold up a lot better, and it's got other fancy stuff going on. Yeah. But it's hard to point people to my website to get that, and I sell copy. I've sold some copies here and there.
We just linked it in chat for everybody to find it.
Yeah, Drive-Thru RPG is like, like that people just go in there and start looking around and they're like, I want a supers game. And then they find capers and they buy it there without exploring to see, oh, there's a better, like a nicer version of the book that's going to cost you the same.
Well, yeah.
But eventually conventions will start back up and I'll start selling those.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. We look forward to seeing you at some of those conventions. And we call that the before times when we talk about life before COVID.
Yes.
What is a game that you absolutely recommend above all others? And this doesn't have to be a game you made, but it can be. Is there a game out there that you just really wish you could be playing?
I'm very much a fan of Threadbare. I have not had a chance to play it yet. I own it. I've read it. I love it. It's a neat game idea. It's Stitch Punk is how it's described.
Stitch Punk. Okay.
Yeah, it uses a very simple version of the Powered by the Apocalypse rules. So you've got playbooks, but it's very kind of streamlined and kind of toned down a little bit. So it works nicely for younger players as well, because it's not, some of those playbooks can get complex in some of those PBTA games. And it's basically you're playing toys in the after times, as it were, like humanity, whatever was here before is gone now, and you are this damaged toy, and everybody's playing damaged toys, and so you're getting along and getting by in this as a broken toy in a broken world. And it's decidedly not combat oriented, although you can simulate combat, but it's more about exploring the world and finding ways to uplift each other and repair the things that are broken and help each other and yourself. It's called Threadbare, Bare.
I'm going to link that in chat for everybody to see as well. That is a cool sounding game also. Tell me about Nerdburger Games. Like, how did you? So you came up with Nerdburger Games. You definitely did some really cool stuff with it. What would be, the transition that you said? I think I'm going to actually name my game company Nerdburger, and I'm going to do this. Like, what's behind the name first? I think is probably a good first step segue.
It started with a podcast that my friend Mike and I did. And it's still going. I've recently bowed out of it because I've just got so much other stuff on my plate. But we did it for years and years, every week in new episodes, the Nerdburger podcast. The podcast existed before the game company. And he came up with the name. And we there was a point where we just kind of chatted about the idea of like, well, we could do a podcast. What would it be about? We just kind of talk about geeky stuff. We'll have guests come on. We'll change topics up a little bit every week. And we were just kind of half talking about it, not really serious. And then he said, I'll do all the technical stuff. You show up every week and be funny. And I said, okay.
To twist my arm. Hang on. Is there liquor involved? This will make it easier.
And so we started doing it, and he's the one who came up with the name. And so then when I started doing game design and stuff and everything, I thought, well, there's an audience built. People know me from Nerdburger, so let's roll that into games as well.
And you've got games, podcasts. We just linked Nerdburger Games in chat a few minutes ago. You've got quite a few games. We've got Capers, which you've already mentioned is your most successful project so far. You've got Good Strong Hands, which looks like an Irish. No, it's Fantastic Creatures.
It's like
and newly arrived human allies working to save the home of Reverie from destruction by the faceless, malevolent force known only as the Void.
I was looking at it earlier. It looks because that was one that you just finished kickstarting, right? Just a few months ago.
I kickstarted, last year in fall of last year. I just got the last 2 pieces of art today. And sent them off to the layout guy. And so
saw the post.
If all goes well, we will be going to getting print proofs with the printer in a couple of weeks.
I think one of the things that I like so much is that your games are there is no one setting that you're taking place in. You've got stuff from the modern, urban modern, and mergers and acquisitions. You're all over the place with capers. You're setting your baseline back in the gangster era, but it's all again. It's kind of like GURPS. It reminds me of GURPS in many ways.
Yeah.
In that
It jumps decades
yeah.
in some of the supplements.
You've got the
Die laughing.
horror side, and then now you've got this fantasy side with Good Strong Hands, or mythal. It's
I think Die Laughing is the one that has me the most interested, because that screams improv all day long. That literally, the description of it, you're looking at it and you're like, this is kind of like what you were describing for what you were doing for the Reddit fairs, except in an RPG.
Yeah, it's structured improv.
Yeah.
Die Laughing, yeah, it's a GM-less game that uses like a 3-act with like 3-act system where you're randomly determining scenes in a horror movie. Everybody's playing a character in a horror comedy movie, and your character is probably going to die. In fact, that is the end goal of most characters, sometimes all of the characters. But when your character gets wrapped, gets killed off or turned into a sexy vampire, then you become a producer on the movie and continue to manipulate the story and the game is until the end.
So everybody gets to keep playing, even if they get whacked. Okay.
Mm.
Which is kind of big when you're playing a game. Once people, in a lot of board games, once you're out, like, there's no point in them sitting there for 2 hours while the last 2 players beat the heck out of each other or whatever it is they're going to do, right? Like
Right.
Monopoly sucks if you're the first person out, right?
Well, that was one of the core, like it was really at the core. Like the very first thing where Die Laughing began was like, what if you make a horror game where your character can die and then there's still something to do?
Kind of a good twist. I like it. And then 4 little games. Would you have 4 little games built into a game, right?
That was an experiment on Kickstarter. I ran a 4-day Kickstarter to just see if I could get like a little bit of artwork and layout work done for these 4 little mini games and just make a little like 20-page booklet.
How'd that go?
It's funded successfully.
Yeah,
I made I covered my expenses and I think I made like maybe a few $100 extra for my trouble.
Okay.
It puts a small, it puts a little offering in the mix where like all the other games up until that point had been like larger, kind of full size RPGs, whereas 4 little games is like, oh, here's a little something, you get like $5, you can buy the PDF.
And then what about 5 little games to see here?
I've thought about it. I've got there's a couple of mini games that I had designed in the past and I was like, okay, well that's 2 of them. What do the other 3 need to be?
One of them's going to be a new chase game.
Yeah, one of them's a card chase game, obviously.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing that's really cool is, Craig, you can be hired for RPG services.
Yes.
So you're available for hire. You understand the target audiences. You make sure that you express your different services, everything from freelance writing to game design consulting to extended game design consulting and publishing consulting, as well as, here's how you do a Kickstarter. These are the ways it worked for me, which is some great stuff. And then you've got references, which is kind of not something you see very many people that are new to the business be able to put down, but you've been doing this a while, long enough. You've got some actual good names on here. How often do you think that, how much do you want to do this? But because we'll push you left and right in front of anybody you want. So,
well, it's one of those things that it's on the webpage and I promote it and throw it up there and kind of remind people of it every so often. I've only done a handful. But I've also plus like a couple of people have said like, oh, well, I'm working on this thing and there's going to come a point where I'm going to come and pick your brain about Kickstarters. I'm going to, sit down and consult with you for an hour or something about Kickstarters.
Mm-hmm.
And so that may happen down the road. And it's
Pipeline.
also kind of depends, on like what my availability is there. It's possible that if I'm in the, really neck deep in a bunch of stuff, I may not have the time. So I'm not pushing too hard for it, because also if that sort of thing takes off, if that were to take off, if I suddenly became in demand a whole bunch, that's less games that I'm designing. That's less stuff that I'm actually moving forward on my own, because this is a side gig and likely will remain one.
But at the same time, having talked to other game designers, I've talked to several that wrote for Weird, wrote for Alderac, then Fantasy Flight. In general, the market seemed to be moving towards the freelance writer anyways. At least a couple years ago, last I talked to them in 2019. I'm kind of out of touch with them through 2020.
I would say that if any indicators in terms of where some people have moved to from employment perspectives is, there is a fair amount of percentage of writers and other designers that are on contract basis. And that's basically where it's at. So from a professional perspective, it never hurts to have a solid background in consulting and contracting, as well as, work for other big boys when you can get it. It's good work when you can get it, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I just kind of, the freelance stuff and the consulting stuff, it's been sprinkled in over the past few years, just kind of here and there.
And we see that 2020 was the year that your blog, the Nerdburger blog, started to see a lot of good posts start to hit up as well. If you guys haven't checked out Nerdburger Games at nerdburgergames.com, I highly recommend it. Is there, you have something coming up that we should definitely plug for you today. Do you want to lead that off there?
Sure. Yeah. It's Zine Quest is happening on Kickstarter right now. This is the third year they've done it, where it's a whole bunch of promotional of here's like small scale games or small like kind of supplemental type things for games, kind of zine form, 5.5 by 8.5 small booklets, soft cover. The production quality doesn't have to be like what the big boys sometimes are often produce. Like it's very inviting to people to try stuff out, little experimental things, people who are new. And so this year I decided to put together a small scale game that is inspired by What We Do in the Shadows. If you're familiar with the movie, and particularly the TV show,
which is hilarious,
which is spectacular.
Yeah.
If you have not watched it, it's available on a few different streaming services and on cable. And essentially in the game, like in the show, you're portraying Gothic era kind of monsters, vampires, werewolves, ghosts, or maybe a human. And you all share a house together in the modern day, and you're not very good at it. There's going to be sitcom style hijinks of like the trials and tribulations of roommates who have differing personalities and differing needs and wants out of what's going on with their particular lives, or dealing with the house or dealing with other people. And so I designed a little game that sort of kind of replicates what the show does, without stepping on any IP. It's just inspired by all of that, and put it up on Kickstarter as of today while we're talking here on February 2nd. And it's funded and it's rocking and rolling.
And we're probably going to talk a little bit more about just that Kickstarter next week during our news segment, because we kind of just came across it ourselves. We're very excited to see where this goes. And you got a nice little video there at the front, and the description of the mechanics, the artwork looks amazing already. I'm very impressed with where you're already at with this. And the fact that you flat out says this is where the money goes, which is kind of nice, because it builds confidence in that the money's going to the product and that they're going to get what they supported. And you've got a number of successful Kickstarters, at least at this point, under your belt. This Kickstarter is already fully funded.
Yeah, it's low stakes. It funded quickly. It was the goal was small, because it's a small game.
But you've already exceeded that by quite a bit, and there's 13 days to go. So there's plenty of time to get your bids in, or get your pledges in, and get this started. So Go ahead.
One thing about it that I thought was really interesting, and you were talking about it in that it's the more sitcom comedic side, but when you're describing it, it immediately made me think of Being Human, 2011 British TV show of vampire, ghost, and a werewolf living together. But that was a very serious show,
Mhm.
and I like this direction though with the comedy and that type of hijinks, that more levity to it, because it was a little dark, it was a little too serious. It's British, so
Well,
it
they
is
did
what it
there
is.
was a Canadian version too that was equally
Yeah,
like more or less a serious drama.
yeah,
Moments of levity.
few and far between. Yes,
Well, it's
I did.
great now, and the one that they've done now that's currently out is a riot as far as I'm concerned. Because I mean, just the way that they framed like the one guy pulling the pic. I mean, in the ad that you see on the TV for it, the guy pulling the picture down, and he has to put his hand on the buttocks of his wife on her picture, and he says, "Get your hands off my wife's ample buttocks," or whatever it is, and it's just like, what,
Yeah, it's what we do in the shadows is a brilliantly developed and executed satire of both sitcoms, in the kind of contemporary sitcoms, and of the vampire genre in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
By essentially making it a fish out of water story.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's really, it's beautifully done, and there's a lot of great meta humor. I mean, I just recently watched, I'm not going to give anything away, but there's an episode where the main characters of the show meet a bunch of other vampires, and it's actors who have played vampires in other media.
Oh, really?
On other movies and television, playing themselves as vampires.
This is hysterical. That's hysterical, and it probably wasn't.
And so there's a lot of tongue in cheek, a lot of meta humor. It's clear that the makers of the in the movie and the TV show are all kind of the same people that are behind it. It's clear that the creators do not take themselves too seriously at all. They're fully willing to be like, oh yeah, this is all a big joke. Like we're just making fun of the vampire genre. We're having a lot of fun with it.
That's outstanding. That's outstanding. Well, transitioning to letting you actually get back to your work. Thank you so much again for coming out to see us tonight. And thank you to everybody in the audience who was out there watching us and supporting us. We really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. And if anyone wants to find you on social media, where can they find you?
The best spot is at Nerdburger Craig on Twitter. I'm pretty active. I stay on top of that. You can reach out there.
And you can see that on his name tag on the screen as well. And then your website is nerdburgergames.com. Check him out. Craig Campbell, nerdburgergames.com. Great game designer and writer. And we're so excited that we got a chance to talk to you today, Craig. We look forward to seeing you back sometime, maybe, to talk about future games. Yeah, if we're lucky. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And then maybe one day we'll have to have you out as a guest on one of our live plays. If anyone can improv during a live play, it's probably you.
I've taken classes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was gonna say, get the opportunity. You were talking about earlier that you just don't get enough time to play. So
yeah. Oh yeah, we do short shots on Saturdays.
I wouldn't mind playing sometime. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we definitely will drag you in. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for watching this week. We'll see you guys next week on Tuesday at 7 p.m. at the Games Tavern Happy Hour, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Central. And we'll see you guys next week. Take care, everybody.